Well, hello there. This is Craig Hain, and this video is an addendum to Chapter 6 in the book How and Why Homeschool Math Can Be Vastly Superior to Public School Math. And of course, as I said, I'm Craig Hain, and you know about me from other videos, I'm sure. Now, this is an addendum to Chapter 6. And if you haven't watched Chapter 6 yet, the video, or read the Chapter 6, the paper, you'll probably want to do that because this is the chapter on STEM math. And it's critically important to any parent that has a student that's interested in STEM math. Now, what I want to do in this video is I want to show you things that I talked about in the other video about the math curriculum in particular. And if you go to the math curriculum, you can download the complete syllabus for tiers 1 through 5, which I have done already. And so I have a PDF on that, and I want to discuss those with you now. Okay, we're going to start now with Tier 4. I've already discussed the first 3 tiers on the previous chapters, videos. And this is the where we start now with STEM math. This goes beyond now Tier 3, which is for the SAT and so on. First of all, I really now start using George Simmons' wonderful book, Pre-Calculus Mathematics in a Nutshell, because it's a wonderful book. It's only $15. It's 119 pages long, written by the great teacher George Simmons, and it's about geometry, algebra, and trigonometry. And of course, I add a lot more to it that's not in the book. Complex numbers and Wolfram Alpha are also covered in Tier 4. Those George Simmons didn't cover that back in 1988, of course. Now, what happens is I start again talking more about geometry, and I go a little deeper into it now than I did in Tier 2. And so I use George Simmons' book a lot. I use some notes. And this is just things about geometry now that are a little bit deeper than things that we covered back in Tier 2 that a STEM student might want to know. Then we get into algebra. Now, algebra is much deeper now than we did back in Tier 2. There's a lot more that we need for STEM that you did not need for just practical math. And so we started doing a lot of reviewing. Now, notice that in A5, I introduced Wolfram Alpha for the first time. Now, that's a really, really big deal because as you're going to see in a minute, I'm going to give you some demonstrations. Wolfram Alpha does things that you cannot do manually, and it revolutionizes the way you teach math. And so when I now cover circles and parabolas, which are in George Simmons' book, these are called conic sections, and I add ellipses and hyperbolas with notes. They're not in the book. Then Wolfram Alpha, it just makes it so much better to learn. As a matter of fact, I've taught conic sections many, many times back the old manual way, and when I taught it with Wolfram Alpha, I understood it better than I'd ever understood it before. Now, as I mentioned earlier in Chapter 6, the workhorse of modern STEM math are functions and graphs, all kinds of different functions. And so that's what we begin to study now, polynomial functions, logarithm functions. And then, of course, after we do that, we get into trigonometry. We do trigonometry functions. Now, there are a lot. Trig is a very, very deep subject. Trigonometry permeates all of STEM math, really, in many, many different ways. Now, I showed you the very simple version of trig back in Tier 2 for solving triangles. But as functions, they go way beyond that. And if you know math, you know what I'm talking about. And if you don't, you'll have to take the program to really understand it because it's a very, very deep and wonderful subject. George Simmons covers it wonderfully in his book, but the Wolfram Alpha makes it incredibly much better. Now, something that George doesn't cover in his book is complex numbers. Most high schools don't cover them properly. Well, I have a whole bunch of lessons on complex numbers that are absolutely critical. You need to understand them from both an algebraic and a geometric perspective. Trigonometry becomes extremely important in this. Euler's identity is the key to the entire thing. Richard Feynman called the Euler identity the most beautiful equation in mathematics, and I think he was probably in many respects right, because that's really the basis of complex numbers, and complex numbers are really the basis of modern physics, like quantum theory. So you need to understand it. Of course, they're used so many places in math. So complex numbers are critically important, and I cover them in a way I've never seen covered in any high school math textbook. In fact, usually these aren't covered properly in college very often until you get to your junior year. And they need to be covered in high school. You can understand them easily in high school. Have some special topics that we cover that will be valuable to STEM, special topics on geometry, particularly for math majors and teachers. Now, you don't necessarily, STEM students don't need that, but it's wonderful topics that are in George's Simmons book, and so I cover them, particularly if you're interested in math or if you're a math teacher. Then in Tier 5, I get into calculus. Now, there's differential and integral calculus, and so I begin doing differential calculus, and now I do teach you some of the manual techniques because they're relatively easy to learn, but I also use Wolfram Alpha. Wolfram Alpha makes it ever so much easier to do calculus and to learn calculus. And so we go through derivatives, and it's differential calculus, and we use a lot of examples from Wolfram Alpha as well as some manual. I might tell you, Wolfram Alpha will even tutor you on how to do these things manually if they're doable. I'm going to show you an example a little later in this video, though, where sometimes you can't do it manually. And then there's applications of graphing, and then we do integral calculus in part 2. Now, integral calculus is where historically students have really struggled. The manual techniques are so difficult, I don't really teach them. I give you a quick overview of them in C14, but really we use Wolfram Alpha for all of the integral calculus because that's what makes it so doable and so understandable. Nobody uses the manual techniques anymore. No professional would bother using the manual techniques any more than they would do manual techniques for doing arithmetic when they can use a calculator. Now, I don't have the syllabus for Tier 6 in this particular area, but if you go beyond get through calculus, then we do differential equations, and I have the same approach to that, and you never get that in high school in any event. Now, if you go to STEM Math Academy, you'll see Take the STEM Math Quiz. Now, this is something that I use to show future STEM students what they need to do to get prepared. Now, I've downloaded the STEM Math Quiz, and so I'm going to show it to you here in a PDF format. And here it is. Now, what I've done with the STEM Math Quiz, I've given you a dozen problems, and I say you should be able to solve these quickly and easily. If you can complete this quiz in less than an hour, you're ready to compete with the best educated peers that you're going to have at a really good STEM university, like say MIT. And a lot of these best educated peers will come from other countries, international students, because I don't know today of any high school in the United States that will teach you how to do these problems using Wolfram Alpha. And the reason they're easy to do is Wolfram Alpha. Manually, these problems are extremely difficult. Conceptually, they're easy to understand, but they're very hard to do manually. And so this is something that if you can't do these 12 problems pretty quick and easy, that means you haven't learned to use the tool yet to do it, and that's going to put you at a disadvantage to any student that does know. So if you go to a school, let's say you go to MIT, and you're in some science classes, or maybe a math class, and if you're sitting next to students that have learned how to use this tool, they understand the concepts and the modern tool, and you don't know it, think of what a disadvantage you have. You're going to have to catch up. I'm not saying you can't do it, but it's going to be a real challenge for you. Now, the other thing I mentioned in Chapter 6 is what is called the supercomputer. And if you go to supercomputer.org, you can learn all about it. Now, one of the things a supercomputer will do for you is that it will actually tutor you in the manual way of doing these problems if they're doable manually. The supercomputer is got all the Wolfram Alpha tools in it. It's based on a Raspberry Pi computer, and it comes loaded with Mathematica and Wolfram Alpha Pro and Wolfram Language, a brand new programming language. It's just an incredible tool, and this supercomputer's been out for a couple of years now, and I use it all the time. I can't get along really without it. We had some engineers design this for us to make the Raspberry Pi easy to use. It's based on the Linux operating system, which makes it very secure on the internet. There's a picture of it right there. It's the size of a deck of cards. You see there's a quarter, and there's a supercomputer. And so it's really the size of a deck of cards. And what you do is you plug it into any TV you want to through an HDMI cable or any monitor. You can plug it in, and then you plug it in whatever your favorite keyboard and mouse is, or a keyboard with a touchpad, into USB ports. It hooks to the internet either through Wi-Fi or Ethernet. Now, it's not battery operated. It does require power. It's like the kind of power you would use for a cell phone, only a little bit higher power. And when we say the supercomputer, we include an HDMI cable and the power supply in it, so you don't have to go buy those. And it's just a wonderful thing. I can't tell you how wonderful this product is. I think that any STEM professional that's using math to solve problems would want this. And I will tell you, the Wolfram tools go way beyond calculus and differential equations. The user manual for the Wolfram tools is like 50,000 pages long. It does Fourier series and matrix theories and just all sorts of things, way beyond calculus and differential equations. So as you study STEM and you do more and more things, it's just you've got the tool ready to do it. And it's just a fantastic product. And so what I advise you to do is what I did at the end of Chapter 6. I advise you to go to the math curriculum, the pricing page, and I advise you to sign up for it and to get going. And you can use the family plan, as I've already told you before, or you can actually sign up if you want to take indefinite amount of time. You can just take tier 1 through 5 and then have as long as you want. If you think it's going to take you more than a couple of years, then this is probably the way to go. Otherwise, you probably will use a family plan. And if you have multiple students, you'll want to use a family plan because then it's much cheaper when you have multiple students. And I will say by the time you get to tier 4, you're probably going to want to invest in a supercomputer. You don't really need it up through tier 3. But once you get to tier 4, you're going to want one because it's just going to be a huge, huge time saver. When you do Wolfram Alpha queries, it's free on the internet through any computer, but you can't save them easily. When you have the supercomputer, you can save them in a notebook, and that means you can do a lot of experimenting. And the best way to learn math is just do lots and lots and lots and lots of problems and experiment with it and see how it works. That's really the heuristic approach that I recommend. So this is Dr. Dell, and I thank you very much for watching this video too. And if you're interested in STEM or you have a student that is, then I think that we'll probably very well get acquainted, because if you do sign up for our program, as you know, you're going to be the coach, then I'm going to be the teacher. We're going to work together and give your student the very best possible STEM math education. See you on another video.